What does make a good magic system? Especially high and epic fantasy books need three things to really excel and be loved. They need good world building, they need good character development, and they need an interesting and good magic system. But what does a good magic system really need in and of itself? I thought about this quite a lot, and I want to use the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson as an example of what I think a magic system absolutely needs to make a series great. Just as the world and the characters and the actions and the rules of the world need to be understandable and also need to have consequences for the characters within the world, the magic system itself needs to have rules that are observable by us, the readers, and also trackable. So if something happens that is outside of those rules, it's a hint for the story and not a mistake. Sanderson does this quite well in the Mistborn trilogy. For those of you who don't know Mistborn and have never read the books and may not know what the magic system is about, in Mistborn characters can use and manipulate metal, and each metal, for example iron or steel or bronze, will give the character, the person, a different kind of power. Now it's very rare that a person can use every metal there is in the world, but it's not unheard of. For the most part, if people are able to use that power at all, they will be able to use one metal. And here's why logic and rules comes into play. There are instances where a character is established within the series to be able to use, let's say, iron. And suddenly, this character starts to manifest or use powers outside of iron, which at this point is a clear hint that there is something else going on, because the magic system has rules. If you can only use one metal and that metal is iron, you should not have access to these other powers. And that's something I personally really love in fantasy books, when you get shown things, for example, a character using a different power than they should be able to, and the author is trusting us to deduct what that means for the situation, for the combat, for the world, for the story of the book. Next up is complexity. Now, I'm not a fan of overly complex magic systems because I'm dumb as fuck. So a magic system needs to be complex in a way that it's easy to learn and understand, but gives a lot of opportunities and options to be used by the people in that world. Just like in our example, Mistborn, the people that are able to manipulate and use metal for different powers, it's very easy to understand. You digest a metal and it gives you a certain power. You can list the rules and how that magic system works in 2 or 3 pages, which is what Brandon Sanderson does. You don't really need to be a genius to understand how the magic system works in general. Yet, because there are so many metals and so many different powers, it gives a lot of variety to the certain fights and also use cases outside of combat, which is a point I will get to later. However, the magic system also needs to be complex enough so it warrants an explanation in the first place, and also gives the author and us readers some room to grow in the future. For example, expanding the metals that are to use, or expanding the possibilities and applications of the magic within that world. Thirdly, I think a magic system needs to be flexible. It may seem counterintuitive at first to talk about rules and talk about complexity and then demand a magic system to be flexible as well. But it's like I said, a magic system needs to have different applications outside of combat. Don't get me wrong, I love an epic fight, I love epic combats, and Mistborn is definitely the series you are gonna look for those things, at least for me. However, it kind of gets boring and stale if the only thing people use your magic for is to fight, because at that point they could also use a gun. The reason I'm reading a high and epic fantasy book is because I want the magic to be a performative and really important and integral part of the world. It needs to be really ingrained in the way of life and the way it shapes the world and the people and how they interact with that world. Therefore, it has to be used for something else other than combat. In our example, this is beautifully done by Brandon Sanderson because the magic system also allows for people to use these kind of powers and the magic to do lots of other things like influence people, manipulate people, intrigues, and also just detective work in general. There are tons of fascinating applications of that magic and of the possibilities of those metals that even the characters themselves discover throughout the series. Which is also a reason why flexibility is needed. It needs to be flexible enough so you can change things later or add things and discover possibilities of those powers with the reader. I want to go on that journey with the character together. I want to learn about the magic and discover the powers with the characters themselves. Number 4, I think a magic system needs to innovate. This is really easy to say laying back in my chair as a YouTuber and influencer to be demanding a innovative magic system from authors. But I do feel like there is a point to be made here. I don't demand that an author reinvents the wheel. I really don't. I'm completely fine reading something that I've read before, but please add a different kind of take or spin to it because that keeps us readers curious as well. In our example, the metals that the people use, you could say it's very reminiscent of telepathic powers. Pushing and pulling stuff with your mind, influencing people with your minds is basically the same thing to the effect that people with metals do. But the way people acquire those powers, the way that it has a reserve and is not an infinite power like telepathic powers usually are, makes this interesting because people need to replenish those resources, people need to find those metals in the first place, and people need to be careful because not everyone can use anything. So through adding clear rules and really limiting in some cases what the people and the characters in the book can do, Sanderson creates a very flexible yet innovative system in the way that the powers are acquired and used within the world. An important part of what makes a magic system great is the acquisition and the origin. I don't think that it needs to be clear from the get-go how powers are acquired or where you can get them, etc. But I need to know how people are able to use the powers. For example, in Mistborn, I need to know that there are certain metals they need to ingest, and if they don't ingest those metals, they won't be able to use their powers. Therefore, I need to know how long does a certain amount of metal last, how easy is it to acquire certain metals, etc. Where do the powers come from? We don't need to know that. That can be part of the story, but I need to know where you get the metal for your magic. Anyway, that was my rambling about what I think a good magic system makes. If you have any other ideas what a good magic system really needs to have, leave them in the comments below. Subscribe to this channel for more bookish content, and we will see each other in the next video.